Welcome to our deep dive into the psychology of money by Morgan Housel. I gotta say, this book is really fascinating. It explores how our minds work when it comes to money, and it's already challenged some of my own assumptions about it.
Yeah, it's a real eye-opener for sure. You know what I think is so compelling about it, though?
What's that?
Housel doesn't just focus on the numbers. He dives into the actual human stories behind financial, success and failure.
Absolutely. Right from the start, he throws us these contrasting stories like Ronald Reagan, the janitor who quietly became a multimillionaire investor.
Right.
And then Richard Fuchsione, a Harvard-educated executive who went bankrupt.
Yeah.
What struck you about that juxtaposition?
Well, I think it really highlights this core argument that Housel makes. Financial success, it isn't primarily about intelligence or education.
Right.
It's about behavior.
Yeah.
Reid's story shows us the power of discipline and long-term thinking, while Fuchsione's downfall shows us the dangers of, unchecked spending and lack of self-control.
It's actually kind of reassuring in a way.
Yeah. How so?
It means we don't have to be financial geniuses to be good with money.
Right.
It's more about developing the right habits and mindset.
Exactly. It's about mastering those emotions and behaviors rather than trying to outsmart the market. Housel argues that anyone can achieve financial success regardless of their background.
Okay, so then he tells this incredible story about Bill Gates. Apparently, attending Lakeside School in Seattle was this 1 in a million chance that set him on the path to Microsoft because they had a computer lab in the late 60s.
Wow.
But he also tells the story of Gates' equally brilliant friend, Ken Evans, who died young in a mountaineering accident. This part really made me question the whole notion of success and how much control we really have.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder for sure that luck and risk play this undeniable role in all our lives, even those who seem like self-made successes.
Absolutely.
I mean, Gates had this unique opportunity that few others had at the time.
Yeah.
While Evans, despite his talent, faced a tragic and unpredictable event.
It challenges the idea that success is solely about merit, doesn't it?
It does.
It makes you wonder if someone like Bill Gates acknowledges the role of luck in his journey, where does that leave the rest of us?
I think it encourages us to be both ambitious and humble.
Yeah.
We can control our efforts and decisions,
Sure.
but recognizing that external factors influence outcomes can help us approach success with a healthier perspective.
This leads perfectly to another powerful idea from the book.
Yeah.
The concept of enough. Housel recounts this anecdote about the author Joseph Heller at a party with a billionaire. The billionaire is boasting about his wealth, and Heller simply replies, "Yes, but I have something you don't. Enough."
I love that anecdote.
It's such a simple statement, but it really resonated with me.
It speaks to the idea that contentment isn't tied to a specific number in your bank account.
Right.
It's about feeling satisfied and fulfilled with what you have. Housel argues that defining your enough is crucial for long-term happiness, regardless of your financial achievements.
And he doesn't just leave it at that. He contrasts Heller's contentment with the stories of Rajat Gupta and Bernie Madoff, both incredibly successful individuals who ended up driven to ruin by their relentless pursuit of more.
Right. Their stories really highlight the danger of never feeling like you have enough. Even when they achieved extraordinary success, they were still driven by this desire for more, which ultimately led to their downfall. It underscores the importance of finding contentment with what you have and avoiding the trap of constantly chasing the next big thing.
So how do we actually define enough for ourselves? It feels like such an abstract concept, especially in a world that constantly tells us to strive for more.
It's the key question, isn't it? And it's a deeply personal journey. I think it starts with understanding your values, priorities, and what truly brings you happiness. Material possessions can provide temporary satisfaction, but it's that deeper sense of purpose and connection that leads to lasting fulfillment.
Okay, now let's dive into something a bit more tangible. Compounding. Housel uses this really cool analogy about ice ages to illustrate how small changes over time can lead to huge results. Subtle shifts in the Earth's orbit caused massive ice sheets to form and melt over millennia.
Right.
It's a slow process, but the impact is immense.
Yeah, and Housel brilliantly connects this geological phenomenon to the world of investing. He argues that just like the gradual buildup of ice sheets, consistent investing, even in small amounts, can create significant wealth over the long term thanks to the power of compounding.
And of course, he uses Warren Buffett as the ultimate example. Buffett's been investing for decades, letting his returns compound year after year. It's not about hitting home runs every time, but about staying consistent and letting time work its magic. But here's the thing that blew my mind. Even Bill Gates, a tech visionary, underestimated the power of compounding. Housel shares that Gates initially thought Gmail offering 1 GB of storage was way too much. He couldn't grasp how much data people would eventually need. Why do you think even brilliant minds sometimes struggle with this concept?
I think it's because we're naturally wired to think linearly, but compounding works exponentially. We tend to underestimate that snowball effect that consistent growth can have over time. It's a powerful lesson in understanding the nature of exponential change, especially in a world that's rapidly evolving technologically.
Okay, next up. The idea that staying rich is harder than getting rich. Housel's contrasts Jesse Livermore, a brilliant but ultimately tragic investor who made and lost multiple fortunes, with the steady, disciplined approach of someone like Warren Buffett. What's the key takeaway for you from this comparison?
Livermore's story highlights the importance of survival in building long-term wealth. He was incredibly skilled at making money, but his risk-taking and emotional volatility ultimately led to his ruin. Buffett, on the other hand, emphasizes avoiding catastrophic losses. He understands that preserving capital is just as important as generating returns.
So it's not just about chasing the next big win,
Right.
but also about protecting what you've already earned. That makes sense, but how do we translate that into practical steps? Feels a bit abstract.
It starts with understanding your own risk tolerance and avoiding excessive leverage. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Diversifying your investments and having a margin of safety built into your strategy can help you weather market downturns and avoid catastrophic losses.
Margin of safety, that's a term we hear a lot in investing. Can you explain what exactly that means for someone who might not be familiar with it?
It essentially means having a buffer built into your investments, kind of like a financial cushion. So even if things don't go exactly as planned, you're not wiped out by a single bad decision or market downturn.
That's a great way to put it. It sounds like it's all about managing risk and prioritizing long-term stability over short-term gains.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that financial success is a marathon, not a sprint.
Speaking of long-term goals, one of the most profound ideas in the book for me was the concept of freedom as the ultimate dividend of wealth. Housel argues that having control over your time is the most valuable thing money can buy. It's not just about the material possessions, but about the choices and options that wealth can provide.
He cites research that shows autonomy and flexibility are more strongly correlated with happiness than material possessions. Having the option to choose how you spend your time rather than being beholden to a job or financial constraints is incredibly empowering.
It makes you think about your own life, doesn't it?
It does.
What would you do if you had more control over your time? What trade-offs are you willing to make for that kind of freedom?
Those are questions we should all ask ourselves regularly. It's about aligning our financial decisions with our values and figuring out what truly matters to us. Money is a tool, and it's most powerful when it's used to create a life of purpose and fulfillment.
That's a great point. It's not just about accumulating wealth. It's about using it to build the life you want.
Exactly. And that often requires making conscious choices and trade-offs. It's about understanding that every financial decision has a cost, whether that's measured in dollars, time, or opportunity.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into the psychology of money. We've talked about the importance of behavior over intelligence, the role of luck and risk, the power of compounding, and the concept of enough. What's been your biggest takeaway so far?
For me, it's the emphasis on the psychological aspects of money. Housel does a brilliant job of showing that financial success is not just about understanding numbers, it's about understanding yourself, your biases, and your relationship with money.
I completely agree. It's been a real eye-opener for me as well. We'll be back soon with more fascinating insights from the psychology of money. Welcome back to our deep dive into the psychology of money. We're about to get into some really thought-provoking ideas about wealth and perception and the stories we tell ourselves about money.
Yeah, it's fascinating how Housel unravels these often hidden influences on our financial behavior.
Absolutely. He talks about this concept of the man in the car.
Yeah.
He uses his experience as a valet in Los Angeles to illustrate how we often admire expensive cars more than the people driving them.
Right.
What do you think he's getting at with this observation?
I think it highlights how wealth is often more about perception than reality, We equate expensive possessions with success and admiration, but those things don't always tell the full story.
Right.
People might be stretching themselves financially just to project a certain image.
It reminds me of that story he tells about Roger, the guy who drove a Porsche, leading everyone to believe he was wealthy. Then one day he shows up in an old Honda. Turns out the Porsche was repossessed. He was living beyond his means just to maintain that facade of wealth.
It's a classic example of how we can be fooled by outward appearances. True wealth, as Housel argues, is often invisible. It's about financial security, the investments you've made, and the freedom that comes from having a solid financial foundation.
And he makes this really striking point. Someone driving a $100,000 car might look rich,
Yeah.
but all you really know is that they have $100,000 less than they did before, or maybe even more in debt.
Right. It's a reminder that we often focus on the visible markers of wealth, the things that are easy to show off, rather than the less glamorous but more important aspects like saving, investing, and building long-term financial security.
It's like that saying, don't compare your insides to someone else's outsides. You never really know what's going on behind the scenes of someone's financial life.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to focus on your own financial goals and not get caught up in trying to keep up with others.
This whole idea of perception versus reality ties back to something we discussed earlier, the concept of enough. If you're constantly trying to project an image of wealth, you'll never feel like you have enough no matter how much you earn.
Right. It's about defining your own version of success and financial security rather than letting society dictate your spending habits and aspirations.
Okay, now I want to talk about this idea that Housel brings up about being rational versus being reasonable when it comes to money.
Okay.
He says that we're not robots, we're emotional beings. And sometimes what seems like the most rational decision on paper doesn't actually work in real life.
Yeah.
He uses the example of Julius Wagner-Jauregg, the psychiatrist who won a Nobel Prize for treating syphilis with malaria. It was a risky and unorthodox approach, but it was effective at the time.
Interesting.
What do you think this story tells us about financial decision-making?
Well, I think it highlights that sometimes the best approach isn't always the most perfectly calculated one. We have to factor in our emotions or circumstances and the unpredictable nature of life.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
He emphasizes that it's more important to be consistently reasonable
Yeah?
than to try to be perfectly rational all the time.
I see.
It's about making sound decisions that align with your values, even if they're not always mathematically optimal.
So it's about finding that balance between logic and intuition, head and heart.
Exactly. And recognizing that there's no a one-size-fits-all approach to financial decision-making.
He also talks about the importance of having a margin of safety
Yeah.
in your financial decisions. It's like a card counter in a casino.
Yeah.
You might have an edge, but you still need to be prepared for the unexpected.
Right. Having that financial cushion, whether it's savings, investments, or a diversified portfolio, can help you navigate the ups and downs of the market and life in general. It's about being prepared for the inevitable bumps in the road.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about having a plan, but also being flexible and adaptable when things don't go as expected.
Absolutely. And recognizing that even the best laid plans sometimes need to be adjusted.
This leads to another interesting point Housel makes about the long game and the importance of persistence.
Okay.
He tells the story of a friend who became a doctor, despite having no real advantages in life.
Right.
It took him a decade longer than his peers, but he persevered.
Wow.
Why do you think he chose to highlight this story?
I think it's a reminder that life is long and our financial journeys are rarely linear. You know, there will be setbacks and detours along the way.
Yeah.
What matters is that we stay focused on our goals and don't give up easily.
It's about playing the long game and recognizing that success often takes time and effort.
And about being willing to adapt and adjust our plans as our circumstances change.
He also cautions against getting stuck in the trap of sunk costs. Sometimes the best decision is to cut your losses and move on, even if it feels like we're giving up on something we've invested time or money in.
It's a tough lesson to learn, but it's crucial for making sound financial decisions. We can't let past decisions dictate our future choices, especially if those past decisions are no longer serving us.
It reminds me of the famous quote, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results."
Exactly. Sometimes we need to be willing to change course, even if it means acknowledging a mistake or a change in priorities.
Now, Housel gets into this concept he calls the price of everything. He argues that every decision, especially those involving money, has a cost, even if that cost isn't immediately apparent.
Right.
He uses the example of General Electric, a company that was once a corporate titan, but eventually collapsed due to hidden risks and unsustainable practices. Their pursuit of short-term profits ultimately came at a huge cost.
It's a reminder that there are no shortcuts to sustainable success, both in business and in personal finance.
Trying to game the system or avoid the inherent risks often leads to bigger problems down the road. Okay, then he dives into this fascinating comparison between investing and paying the entrance fee at Disneyland.
Okay.
Seems like an odd analogy at first, but it actually makes a lot of sense.
Oh, so.
He's essentially saying that you have to be willing to pay the price of admission, the volatility and uncertainty of the market, if you want to enjoy the potential rewards of investing.
I see.
He argues that trying to avoid volatility is like trying to shoplift at a store.
Okay.
You might get away with it for a while, but eventually you'll get caught.
Right.
Embracing volatility as part of the game is essential for long-term success.
It's about understanding that risk and return are inherently linked. If you want the potential for higher returns, you have to be willing to stomach the ups and downs of the market.
This reminds me of another story he tells about Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE, who manipulated earnings to create an illusion of stability.
Yeah.
It worked for a while, but the true cost eventually became apparent with disastrous consequences for shareholders.
It's a classic example of how trying to avoid risk or manipulate the system can ultimately backfire.
Housel makes a really important point about viewing volatility as a fine versus the cost of admission. He says if you see it as a fine, you'll constantly be stressed and hesitant.
Right.
But if you embrace it as part of the experience, you can ride out the ups and downs and enjoy the potential rewards of long-term investing.
It's a mindset shift that can make a huge difference in how you approach investing.
This next chapter is about the psychology of bubbles and why they form and persist.
Right.
He argues that it's not just about greed, it's about how we rationalize our decisions, even when they're driven by irrational exuberance.
Yeah.
He uses the example of the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s, where investors poured money into internet companies with little to no revenue or profit.
Yeah.
The logic at the time was that these companies were disrupting traditional industries and had unlimited growth potential. He points out that bubbles often occur when people with different investment goals and time horizons end up playing the same game. Long-term investors might be looking for steady growth, while short-term traders are chasing quick profits. When these groups collide, it can create distortions in the market.
It's like two groups of people playing different sports on the same field. The rules and objectives are different, and it's easy for confusion and conflict to arise.
It's a reminder of the importance of defining your own financial goals and sticking to your own game plan. Don't get caught up in the hype or let other people's decisions dictate your own.
Absolutely. It's about understanding your own risk tolerance, your time horizon, and your investment objectives.
Now, for something a little different, Housel talks about the allure of pessimism
Okay.
and argues that even though the world generally tends to improve over time, pessimism often seems more credible and intellectually sophisticated than optimism. Why do you think that is?
I think it's partly because we're wired to pay more attention to negative news and potential threats, It's an evolutionary trait that helped our ancestors survive in dangerous environments.
Housel points out that pessimistic predictions tend to get more attention, even if they're not always accurate. He uses the example of a Russian professor who predicted that the United States would break up into smaller countries in 2010.
Wow.
Of course, that didn't happen. But predictions of doom and gloom often capture the public imagination more readily than optimistic forecasts.
Right.
He contrasts this with the remarkable post-war recovery of Japan.
Okay.
After being devastated in World War II, Japan emerged as a global economic powerhouse in just a few decades. Few would have predicted such a dramatic turnaround at the time.
It highlights the fact that we often underestimate the resilience and adaptability of human societies. Pessimists tend to extrapolate current trends into the future, but they often fail to account for innovation, ingenuity, and the human capacity for problem solving.
So while it's important to acknowledge risks and challenges, a healthy dose of optimism is essential for navigating the uncertainties of the future.
Right. He uses Stephen Hawking as an example.
Oh, yeah.
Despite facing immense physical challenges, Hawking maintained a remarkably optimistic outlook throughout his life. He saw his life as a bonus, and that allowed him to focus on the positive and make the most of his time.
That reminds me of the quote by Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done.
Exactly. Optimism isn't about ignoring problems. It's about believing in the possibility of solutions and progress, even in the face of adversity.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the power of stories. Housel argues that we're more likely to believe a compelling narrative than a set of dry statistics, even if the statistics are more accurate. Why do you think that is?
I think because we're wired for stories, They help us make sense of the world, connect with others, and remember information more easily.
He uses this clever analogy of an alien visitor observing the U.S. economy in 2007 and 2009.
Oh, wow.
The alien sees no significant changes in the physical infrastructure or resources of the country, yet the economy is in shambles.
Okay.
What's the point of this analogy?
It's meant to illustrate that the story we tell ourselves about the economy, the narrative of confidence, stability, and growth, can have a real impact on our behavior.
Right.
We went from a boom to a bust, not necessarily because of fundamental changes in the real world, but because of a shift in our collective perception.
So the narrative we create around events can be just as powerful as the events themselves.
Exactly. And this applies to our personal finances as well. The stories we tell ourselves about money, success, and failure can have a huge impact on our financial decisions.
This is why we're so susceptible to financial scams and get-rich-quick schemes, right?
Yeah.
We want to believe in the possibility of easy wealth, even when the evidence suggests otherwise.
Exactly. It's a reminder to be skeptical of overly simplistic narratives and to always question our assumptions, especially when it comes to money.
Okay, this next chapter really resonated with me. The importance of controlling your time. Housel argues that this is the ultimate dividend of wealth, the freedom to choose how you spend your days.
Right. He cites research showing that having autonomy and flexibility over your time is more strongly correlated with happiness than material possessions. It's about having options and the ability to pursue your passions without being constrained by financial limitations.
He makes this really insightful point about the changing nature of work. Even though we might work fewer hours than previous generations, technology has blurred the boundaries between work and personal life. We're constantly connected and constantly feeling the pressure to be productive.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Technology has brought us incredible convenience and connectivity, but it's also made it harder to truly disconnect and recharge.
So building wealth isn't just about accumulating money.
Right.
It's about creating the freedom to choose how you spend your most precious resource, your time.
He shares the story of Heinz Berggren, who fled Nazi Germany in 1936 and eventually became one of the most successful art dealers in the world. Berggren's story illustrates the importance of taking risks, being adaptable, and seizing opportunities when they arise.
It's a reminder that wealth can provide the freedom to pursue your dreams and create a life on your own terms.
And it all comes back to the idea of enough that we talked about earlier. It's about defining your own version of success and contentment rather than letting society dictate your goals and aspirations.
Wow, this book is like a roller coaster ride through the world of money psychology. It's fascinating, thought-provoking, and full of surprising insights.
I'm glad you're enjoying it. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to explore. Are you ready to dive into the final part of our deep dive?
Absolutely. I'm eager to hear what other gems Housel has in store for us. Welcome back to our deep dive into the psychology of money. I'm ready to unpack the final set of insights from this fascinating book.
Yeah, there's so much to explore in these last few chapters. You know, Housel really brings it all together, connecting the psychological aspects of money to, some broader societal and historical trends.
One of the ideas that stuck with me is this concept that nothing's crazy when it comes to financial decisions. He argues that people often make choices that seem irrational to others, but they always have a reason for doing so, even if that reason isn't immediately obvious.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a reminder to approach those financial decisions with empathy and understanding, you know? What might seem crazy to you could make perfect sense to someone else given their background, experiences, and circumstances.
He uses the example of lottery tickets.
Right.
People spend billions of dollars on lottery tickets every year, even though the odds of winning are astronomically low. Why do you think people continue to buy lottery tickets, even knowing how unlikely they are to win?
I think for some people, buying a lottery ticket represents a glimmer of hope, a dream of a better future. It's not necessarily about the logic of the odds, it's about the emotional appeal of a potential life-changing event, however unlikely.
It's a reminder that emotions play a huge role in our financial decisions, even when we think we're being rational.
Absolutely. And understanding those emotional drivers can help us make better choices and avoid falling prey to financial decisions driven by fear, greed, or desperation.
Another point Housel makes is how relatively new many financial concepts are. Things like 401k, Roth IRAs, index funds, even credit cards. These are all relatively recent inventions.
Yeah.
Why is this significant?
Well, it highlights that our financial systems are still evolving and we're all adapting to these new tools and concepts. It's no wonder that so many people struggle with managing money effectively.
Yeah. He makes this clever analogy comparing us to dogs who have been domesticated for thousands of years but still retain some of their wild instincts.
Right. We've only had a few decades to adapt to the complexities of the modern financial system. It's a reminder to be patient with ourselves and to recognize that learning to manage money well is a lifelong journey.
Now, Housel gets into this fascinating discussion about how our perception of the world can influence our financial decisions. He argues that we often create narratives to make sense of complex events, even if those narratives aren't always accurate.
Right.
He uses the example of the 2008 financial crisis, which led to a massive loss of wealth and a deep recession. While there were real economic factors at play, the crisis was also fueled by fear, panic, and a loss of confidence in the system.
It's like that game of telephone where a message gets distorted as it's passed from person to person. The story we tell ourselves about the economy can have a real impact on our behavior, even if that story isn't fully grounded in reality.
Yeah. So it's really important to be aware of our own biases and to seek out diverse perspectives. Don't rely solely on one source of information or one interpretation of events. Do your own research, ask questions, and challenge your own assumptions.
Absolutely. It's about being critical thinkers and not blindly accepting the narratives that are presented to us.
Right. And recognizing that financial information is often filtered through various lenses, whether it's the media, politicians, or even our own personal biases.
Right.
Okay. Let's wrap up this deep dive with some of the core takeaways from the psychology of money. What are the most valuable lessons you think Housel offers readers?
For me, it's the emphasis on understanding yourself, your biases, and your relationship with money. Financial success isn't about following a set of rigid rules. It's about aligning your financial decisions with your values and priorities.
It's about defining your own version of enough and recognizing that contentment isn't tied to a specific number in your bank account.
And it's about embracing the long game, being patient, and letting the power of compounding work its magic. It's about understanding that luck and risk are always at play and that no one is immune to the ups and downs of the market or life in general.
And ultimately, it's about using money as a tool to create a life of freedom, purpose, and fulfillment.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. It's about recognizing that money is a means to an end, not an end in itself.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the psychology of money. Thank you for guiding us through these complex and fascinating ideas.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, the most important investment you can make is in understanding yourself.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.